Hello, everyone, and welcome to this brief introduction to LGBTQIA issues. This is very much an introductory course to terminology, current affairs, and what you can do to get involved regarding the LGBTQIA community. My name is Matt Gamble. I have a master's degree in mental health counseling from Southern New Hampshire's University, and I am currently a PhD candidate student in counselor education and supervision at Walden University. I am a licensed resident in counseling in the state of Virginia, and what that means is I am licensed to practice counseling provisionally under supervision of a more experienced clinical supervisor. So jumping right in, let's start off with talking about gender. What is gender? So gender is a social construct, much like other parts of our society. Most people are familiar with what gender roles are, but most people are not familiar with the idea that gender is a socially constructed phenomenon. People get gender and sex confused because we live in a society where where historically sex and gender have been used in place of one another, in lieu of one another, synonymously. We think of them as meaning the same thing, but they're not. So sex is involved with the biology of a person. Sex involves chromosomes, reproductive organs, hormones, and genitalia. Sex comprises the biology of a person. So the social and cultural constructs of gender identity is the gender a person feels that they are. Gender expression is the gender that a person displays to the world. So if you look at the stars that are placed here on the image here, so this person identifies as biologically is a male. This symbol here represents male. This symbol here represents female. So this person, this hypothetical person, has the biology, the chromosomes, reproductive organs, and genitalia of a male. Their internal gender identity is that they feel that they are female, but the expression, what they display to the world, is that they are male. This person would have what is considered by the mental health community to be gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is when your gender expression and your sex does not match your gender identity, what you feel internally to be your gender. So I start out with this because this has been in the news a lot here recently. We'll talk about that a bit more here in just a few minutes. So let's jump into a little bit of terminology real quick. Like I said, this is pretty much a crash course in LGBTQIA issues. So this list of terminology is not applied exclusively to the LGB, lesbian, gay, bisexual community. Some of these can cross the line here and be applied to the transgender community, but starting out with the lesbian, gay, and bisexual community. So queer is a word that was at one point in time, 25 years ago, was used as a derogatory term to comment or make derogatory comment about a person's sexuality. Queer is also a term that's been reappropriated by the LGBTQ community. I'll use LGBTQ and LGBTQIA plus interchangeably throughout this discussion. Top, bottom, and versatile, those are sexual positions for the gay community. Pansexual is someone who is not necessarily attracted to a person's gender. They're more attracted to perhaps the energy that a person has. A person who identifies as Two-Spirit is a cultural appropriation from Indigenous Americans. Most people who identify as lesbian or gay should not be using Two-Spirit unless they have Indigenous American history. If you identify as a Indigenous American, then yes, Two-Spirit is something that you can use. If you are just strictly Caucasian, everyday white person who happens to be lesbian or gay, you probably should not be using the two-spirit demarcation. But two spirits are from Native Indigenous American mythology in that, or culture, in that the feminine spirit, a person identifies with the feminine spirit and the masculine spirit at the same time. And they were considered wise people. They were considered almost shamans in Indigenous American folklore and tradition. So the coming out process is an ongoing process. That is something that a person who identifies with any of the alphabet soup up here must entertain and must go through each time that they meet someone new. Oftentimes, you cannot just look at someone and tell that they may be lesbian, gay, or bisexual. We may assume, but assumptions are not always correct. Intersex, so the I in intersex corresponds with the I in the LGBTQIA. So let's just go over this real quick. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning, intersex, and asexual, and then the plus sign represents any other group that may not be accounted for within the LGBTQIA. So intersex is a person who was born with both masculine and feminine genitalia, so they may have the internal, the ovaries of a female with the external genitalia of a male, so the penis. And oftentimes these people, when they're born like this, the parents will decide what gender they want to raise that child, whether it be masculine or feminine. A lot of times it may be the medical professional, the OBGYN doctor who is assisting with the birth of the child will just write down what they think it is, what they think the child most closely identifies with. Internalized homophobia is something that's becoming more of a concern within the LGBTQIA community, in that given the unfriendly climate of society these days, a lot of people are choosing to hide their sexuality, which leads to internalizing hatred. Self-hatred has very deleterious effects on a person's mental health. Homosexual is not a word that's used anymore. You can strike that out of your vocabulary of describing someone who might be lesbian or gay. We don't use the word homosexual anymore. It's taken out of the lexicon. It is okay to use specific terms when referring to someone. If someone comes out to you and they're male, then they're gay. You can call them gay. That's okay. You don't have to whisper around that they are homosexual or any other derogatory term, queer. You can use lesbian, gay, bisexual, etc., etc., etc. I'm not going to worry about talking about men who have sex with men. That's an older, much older phrase that's used to describe people who are gay. It's specific to very specific populations. Oh, transgender. So let's clear up the misconception that transgender and drag queen are the same thing. They are not the same thing. Transgender refers to the image that I showed you earlier, the diagram I showed you earlier, where we determined that someone likely had gender dysphoria. Transgender is a person who their internal gender does not correspond or match their external gender expression. Whereas a drag queen is a person who dresses in clothes of the opposite sex. They perform at bars on the weekend. It's I hesitate to call it a lifestyle. For some it is, for some it's not. But the important thing to remember is that drag queen and transgender do not mean the same thing. Cisgender refers to a person who identifies with their gender of birth. If you were born with male genitalia, internally you identify as a male, and to the world you express yourself as a male, then you are a cisgender individual. Dysphoria is a mental health diagnosis that corresponds to a person whose biology at birth, their gender expression, and their gender identity do not correspond. So if you were born with the biology of a female, yet internally you identify as a male, to the world you express your gender as female, then you would have gender dysphoria. Transmasculine. Transmasculine is a term used to describe someone who was born female, identifies as masculine, and has gone through the transition process. The transition process, there's multiple steps to that. The transition process looks like socially transitioning first, so coming out to friends, family, society at large, that you identify as transgender and with the opposite sex. Transfeminine is someone who is born male at birth or assigned male at birth, but identifies as female. We do not use the word transsexual any longer. That is a word that has fallen out of popularity and, again, should be removed from your lexicon. Interoceptive ringing. So interoceptive means internalized, something that you're internalizing, something that's going on within you. Interoceptive ringing implies then that there is a ringing inside. People who identify as transgender and have not yet socially transitioned will oftentimes report an interoceptive ringing. It's an internalized just feeling of a ringing, a vibration, some sort of internalized unsettledness. But once they socially transition, the interoceptive ringing tends to diminish or go away. Dead naming is using someone's name that they were given at birth after they have socially transitioned, change their name, change their gender markers, etc., etc. That's not something that we generally want to do. Dead naming is disrespectful. We want to, as best as possible, use the pronouns and the name that the person has transitioned to. And moving along, so pronouns. We'll quickly talk why pronouns matter. So there's been a lot of talk in recent news outlets, social media, etc., etc., about pronouns. So using someone's correct pronouns is tantamount or the same as pronouncing their name incorrectly, but on purpose. A way of respecting a person and referring to them in a way that's consistent and true to who they are. That's using someone's correct pronoun. It's respectful to use someone's pronoun. You know, if a person's name is Karen, most people can read the name Karen and see what it is. It's Karen. But if you pronounce it on purpose, if you mispronounce it on purpose, that's being disrespectful. Karen or Karen, whatever. That's disrespectful, and you're doing it on purpose. So using someone's incorrect pronouns is the same thing as mispronouncing their name on purpose with the intent of being disrespectful. If you're uncertain of what a person's pronouns are, it is okay to ask them, excuse me, what are your pronouns? Or the best way to do it actually is introduce yourself. Hi, my name's Matt, he, him pronouns. That offers up an environment or the idea that you are a safe person to then, for this person to offer you their name and their pronouns. Hi, my name is Matt, he, him. The person in front of me might be Karen, she, her pronouns, or Karen, he, him pronouns. It offers, it's respectful, and it implies that you are a safe person where this other person who might be transgender can use their authentic pronouns. So the Karen effect. The Karen effect is just something I come up with real quick. So this entire presentation was taken from a lecture I gave with a group of master's level counselor education students. So there was a student in the class whose name was Karen, and she reported during one of our lectures that, you know, she doesn't like her name Karen because whenever she calls customer service, goes to a store, you know, they ask her name, my name's Karen, they instinctively laugh because in our society today, everyone knows what a Karen is, and she feels disrespected by that. So it goes back up here to pronouns. You don't want to be, if your name is Karen, you don't want to be referred to as a Karen. If your pronouns are he, him, you don't want to be called she, her. It's essentially the same thing. The internalized, the feeling that's solicited from the Karen effect is the same thing as using a person's incorrect pronouns on purpose. We're not going to discuss mind mapping. That's getting a little too deep. Current affairs. So in just the first 2 weeks of 2023, over 100 bills targeting LGBTQ plus populations were filed across 22 states. 29 states lack full protection for LGBTQ persons, meaning that there are 29 states in the United States where you could lose your housing, you could lose your employment all those things that make a person, you could lose those only simply because you identify as a person who might be lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, etc., etc., etc. So let that sink in for a moment. In 22 states combined, over 100 bills specifically targeting LGBTQ plus individuals were filed just this year, and it's only June. In 29 of our United States, you could actually still be arrested for being an LGBTQ person. Sodomy in some states is still considered a law, even though the Supreme Court some years ago struck down the Texas sodomy law, which invalidated most laws across the country. But there are still outlier states out there that will at least attempt to bring a charge. So why does any of this even matter? Why does the 100 bills, blah, 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 29 states, why does any of that even matter? So if we think back to our evolutionary biology, it was necessary for an individual to be part of a community, to be part of a herd, if you will, because that offered security, that offered sustenance, that offered the things that we needed for our species to survive. These topics here, these ideas and concerns can lead to what is considered or called rejection sensitivity. And there are two types of rejection sensitivity. Rejection sensitivity can look like anxiety, and rejection sensitivity can also look like just pure anger. Pure anger rejection sensitivity tends to be someone who is vindictive, is out to get back at someone, whereas anxious rejection sensitivity looks just like anxiety. You're anxious about the possibility of being ostracized or excommunicated from your church, from your friend group, from your family, because you identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, plus, etc., etc., etc. So, and rejection sensitivity, there may be, as I alluded to, there may be a biological connection between rejection sensitivity to rejection sensitivity, and that was identified by Leary and Cottrell in 2013. So going back to the biology for just a moment, targeting an entire population of people, the LGBTQ plus population, sends the message that you're not safe anywhere, nowhere. So it follows then that if the LGBTQ population is not safe anywhere, then there's going to be anger rejection sensitivity, and there's going to be anxiety rejection sensitivity. It's the anger rejection sensitivity that one must watch closely. Anxious rejection sensitivity can be treated through mental health therapy. Anger rejection sensitivity can also be treated through mental health therapy, but it's a little bit more difficult to treat. There is also an increased need for mental health services for people who identify as LGBTQ+, simply because of the rejection sensitivity that stems from 100 bills targeting the LGBTQ population in 29 states where it's just not safe to be an LGBTQ person. What you can do, be an ally. First of all, just be an ally, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But what you can do is micro-level advocacy. Micro means at the smallest level possible. So this would be in your immediate environment. In your immediate environment, you can use gender-affirming language, which is using a person's preferred pronouns. If you are uncertain what a person's preferred pronouns are, again, it is okay to ask, as I mentioned and demonstrated earlier. You could also just switch up all pronouns from he, him, she, her to they, them. They, them is always a safe pronoun to use if you're unsure of a person's gender identity. Again, let me reiterate that this was offered and presented to a group of master's level mental health counseling students. So some of these bullet points will not be applicable. Meso level means it's a little bit larger. It's in between micro and macro. Micro is the smallest level, whereas macro is the largest. That's basically the entire world or country. Meso is somewhere in between. You can attend pride celebrations. Even if you identify as cisgender heterosexual, you can attend pride parades. Pride celebrations, not necessarily the parades, but celebrations. That shows support, that shows that you are a safe ally, and that is advocating at the meso level. Macro level, if we're thinking from a nationwide country standpoint, then macro level would be voting for candidates who are supportive of and advocate for the LGBTQ population. Let's see. It's also important to understand that LGBTQIA individuals have multiple intersecting identities. So intersectionality is a social phenomenon that was explored early 2000s, somewhere around in there. And what an intersection is, think of it as a roadway intersection. It is where two streets cross. So there are multiple components of a person's identity. Their sexuality, sexual identity, gender identity. Those are only a few of the streets that cross to make a person who they are. Race is an intersecting street that has impact on the overall person. There's race, socioeconomic status, ethnic origin. Do you identify as Caucasian? Are you from Central Europe? Where are you from? Asia? Those are all intersections that correspond, that cross. And where the more intersections a person has, the more their mental health is going to suffer or be targeted. So the greater the number of intersecting identities a person reports, the greater the likelihood of mental health needs and the greater the likelihood of discrimination and marginalization. Be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. That's what all of this presentation means. Be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. Ally yourself.